The bullet that killed Sergeant First Class Dale Harmon wasn't fired by the enemy. It came from his own command, dressed up in paperwork and pride, 3 weeks before Staff Sergeant Wren was supposed to prove them all wrong. That's not where this story starts, though. It starts the way most disasters do, with a man who was absolutely certain he knew what he was looking at. Colonel Raymond Stetch had been running Ranger operations out of FOB Kestrel for 11 months when the replacement roster landed on his desk. He skimmed it the way he skimmed. Everything that wasn't a threat assessment or a casualty report, fast, with the particular impatience of someone who believed his time was worth more than other people's words. He got to the name halfway down the third page and stopped. Wren, Lena M. Staff Sergeant, Combat Controller, assigned Overwatch and Close Air Support Coordination, Task Force Dagger. He read it twice. Then he called his operations officer, Tulloch, into the office and set the paper on the desk between them like evidence at a trial. "Tell me this is a clerical error," Stetch said. Tulloch, who had learned which questions to answer honestly and which to leave alone, looked at the roster and said nothing. "We have a mission in 72 hours, Stetch continued. 3 vehicles, 13 personnel, a target compound 40 clicks into territory that has already killed 4 of ours this year. And AFSOC is sending me a woman to coordinate air support. She's qualified, sir. Her file? I've read files before." Stetch folded the paper in half. "Get me someone else." He didn't get someone else. AFSOC held the line, which meant someone at a level above Stetch's comfort zone had already signed off on Wren's assignment, and the colonel spent the next 48 hours making his displeasure known in every way that stopped just short of insubordination. He reassigned her briefing slot to the end of the day. He made sure she was billeted in the maintenance annex, the building farthest from the operations center. When she arrived at FOB Kestrel on a Tuesday evening with a kit bag, a tablet loaded with topographic data, and the kind of quiet that suggested she'd walked into rooms like this before, Stetch found somewhere else to be. It was Tulloch who met her on the tarmac. He was a fair man by the standards of the place, which meant he kept his doubts private and his observations to himself until he had enough evidence to form a conclusion worth keeping. He looked at Wren and formed no immediate conclusions. She was 31. Medium height, lean in the way that suggested sustained effort rather than genetics, with close-cropped dark hair and eyes that moved across the FOB in steady, methodical sweeps the moment she stepped off the transport. She wasn't cataloging threats. She was building a picture. Tulloch had seen the same thing in good intelligence officers and in good snipers and in exactly 2 combat controllers he'd worked with over 14 years. The ones who survived tended to look at a new environment the way a mechanic looks at an unfamiliar engine, not with alarm but with genuine curiosity about how the parts fit together. "Staff Sergeant Wren," he said. "I'm Major Tulloch. I'll walk you through the operations schedule." "Appreciated," she said. "Is the targeting data for the Zafar compound current?" "The aerial package I received was dated 3 weeks back." Tulloch blinked. Most people, arriving at a new posting after a 12-hour transport flight, asked about the mess hall. "We have updated imagery from 48 hours ago," he said. "I can pull it up. I'd like to see it tonight if that's possible, sir." It was possible. Tulloch made it so. He would think about that exchange later, when things had gone very badly, and then, improbably, had gone right again, and he would recognize it as the first sign that Wren was not what the colonel had decided she was. The team met her the next morning. Task Force Dagger was 8 men, most of them Rangers with combat patches on both sleeves, and the particular economy of movement that came from doing dangerous things for a long time. Their team leader was Master Sergeant Braddock, a 43-year-old from Sudbury, Ontario, who had joined the U.S. Army on a dual citizenship provision and had spent the next 2 decades becoming the kind of soldier that colonels sent into places they couldn't talk about afterward. He was not a man given to theatrics. He was, however, a man who said what he thought, which was sometimes the same problem dressed in different clothes. He looked at Wren across the briefing room and said, "You've done a Joint Terminal Attack Controller course." "I'm a combat controller," Wren said. "JTAC qualification is part of the pipeline, sir." "You've done it in combat conditions?" "Twice. Kandahar in 2019, then Deir ez-Zor in 21. Braddock wrote something in his notebook. He didn't look satisfied, exactly, but he looked like a man who had updated a variable in an ongoing calculation. The rest of the team was less subtle. Kowalczyk, the senior ranger, made a remark under his breath that Wren either didn't hear or chose not to respond to. 2 of the others exchanged a look that communicated, with the efficiency of men who had worked together for years, a shared set of doubts about the Tuesday arrival from AFSOC. A fourth, a younger ranger named Finch, who had been with the team for only 4 months, watched the exchange and said nothing, which Wren noticed and filed away. She ran the targeting briefing herself. She had spent the previous night with the updated imagery and had come to a conclusion that the previous air support coordinator had missed, or perhaps had seen, and not thought worth raising. The compound has a secondary structure here, she said, indicating a building that appeared in the satellite frame as a storage annex. Thermal imaging from 0300 shows intermittent signatures that aren't consistent with a fuel or equipment cache. The heat pattern suggests bodies at rest. If there's a secondary personnel element holding in that annex, the primary entry point exposes the team that isn't accounted for in the current scheme of maneuver. Braddock leaned forward. How many? Thermal's not precise enough to give a head count. Minimum 4, maximum 12. Previous analysis didn't flag that building, Kowalczyk said. He wasn't asking a question. I know, Wren said. I'm flagging it now. Kowalczyk looked at Braddock. The look said, is she telling us the previous analyst was wrong? Or is she seeing things that aren't there? Braddock looked at the image for a long time. Then he said, we'll adjust the entry sequence. Wren, I want an updated scheme with a suppression option for the annex built in before 1800. She had it done by 1600. Nobody said anything about that. Teams rarely congratulate each other for doing the job they were sent to do. But Finch caught her in the corridor afterward and said, good catch on the thermal. And Wren nodded once and moved on, because there was more work to do. Stetch reviewed the updated scheme that evening and found a reason to object to the adjusted entry sequence. He sent revisions back through Tulloch, who passed them to Braddock with the expression of a man personally embarrassed by the content of his own message. Braddock read the revisions, made a sound that was not printable, and went to talk to the colonel directly. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. Tulloch, who heard most of it through an office wall that was not as thick as Stetch believed, gathered that Braddock had held his ground and that the colonel had yielded the point while making it clear he considered this a favor rather than an admission of error. The mission was a go, with the adjusted scheme intact. They inserted at 0215 into a shallow valley 6 kilometers west of the target compound, moving on foot through terrain that had been described in the intelligence package as lightly trafficked at night and revealed itself to be the kind of quiet that has nothing to do with safety. Wren moved with the team, carrying her radio gear and a rifle she had qualified expert with 4 years running, keeping pace without being asked to and saying nothing that didn't need to be said. Braddock had put her third in the patrol order, ahead of Kowalczyk, which was a mild statement of trust that nobody commented on. The compound appeared on their thermal scope at 0347, exactly where the imagery said it would be. Wren had climbed to the low ridge south of the access road, while the team staged in a dry creek bed 40 meters below. She was flat on the ground with her spotting scope before Braddock gave the order, because she had already identified the position she needed and had moved to it with the minimum of ceremony. He watched her settle and thought about what that meant, and said nothing. I count 6 in the main structure, she said quietly into the radio. Movement in the annex. I'm seeing 2 distinct heat sources now, not the diffuse pattern from the imagery. They're awake or alerted? Braddock said. There was a pause. Wren was watching something that the rest of them couldn't see from their position, and the team waited in the kind of silence that is really just concentrated attention. Awake, she said. One of them is smoking. If they were alerted, you don't smoke. Kowalczyk exhaled slowly. How does she know what they're doing? The scope doesn't. The thermal shows a point source on the roofline of the annex, Wren said before he finished the sentence. A cigarette at 0350. It's not a muzzle flash. The heat bloom is too slow and too diffuse. Kowalczyk stopped talking. Braddock said, what are your recommendations? Suppress the annex with the first element before the main breach. The 2 individuals on the roof are going to hear the entry team regardless of how clean the breach is. If they're not neutralized in the first 30 seconds, they have a clean line of fire down into the courtyard. She paused again. There's also an anomaly in the pattern of vehicle tracks on the north side of the compound. The imagery shows tracks that loop back on themselves near the north gate. I think there's a prepared position there, possibly a buried fighting position or a vehicle hardened into the berm. I can't confirm it from here. Then it's not actionable, Kowalczyk said. Wren didn't answer Lecture him directly, she said. I'm telling you it's there. I'm not telling you I can prove it. You decide what to do with that. Braddock looked at the north gate on his tablet. The track pattern was exactly as she described, and he had been in enough places with prepared positions to recognize that the feeling he was getting from those looping marks was not a feeling he trusted himself to dismiss. Modify entry, he said. We go through the south gate. Longer approach, but we keep the north anomaly on our left flank where Wren can cover it. Kowalczyk made a sound that was not agreement and not quite objection, the sound of a man who has decided to suspend judgment temporarily and will be revisiting the question shortly. They moved. The breach on the main structure was clean. 4 minutes from the south gate to the courtyard, suppression on the annex roof, with the second element before the primary team entered. The 2 men on the roof line down before they had processed what was happening. Inside the main building, 6 individuals, 3 of whom were armed and had time to reach their weapons, and a firefight that lasted 90 seconds and produced 2 Ranger casualties, minor, both walking, before the structure was cleared. The target was in the back room, zip-tied to a support column, disoriented but alive. Braddock was calling in the CASVAC request when Wren's voice came across the radio with a quality that snaps him to attention. North gate, movement, they're coming out. The buried position she had flagged was not a vehicle. It was a room built into the berm like a root cellar, and it held 4 men who had been waiting underground through the entire assault, listening, and had now emerged into the compound. They were moving fast, using the exterior wall for cover, angling toward the south gate, toward the extraction route. Braddock shouted for his team to reorient. Kowalczyk was already moving. 2 of the Rangers were still managing the casualty from the main structure. From the ridge, Wren shot the first man at 340 meters while he was running. She shot the second at 310 meters. The third went to ground behind a piece of earthwork, and Braddock heard her voice in his earpiece, calm and specific. He's behind the berm section, 3 meters right of the gate post. He's going to pop left to fire. Wait. She waited 7 seconds. Now, she said, and she fired before the word finished, and the third man went down before he completed the movement she had predicted. The fourth threw down his weapon. The extraction took 19 minutes. Wren came off the ridge at a jog and was in the creek bed with the team before the vehicles arrived, loading gear and checking the casualties without being asked, and without making anything of the fact that she had just shot 3 moving targets in the dark from a ridge that nobody else had been covering. On the vehicle ride back, Kowalczyk sat beside her. He was a large man with a neck tattoo and the particular stillness of someone who has decided to say something and is choosing the words. The north position, he said. How did you know? The tracks looped, Wren said. Vehicles don't loop near a gate unless someone made them loop. It's not how drivers behave. It's how someone behaves when they're trying to hide that something is buried there. Kowalczyk thought about this. I've been doing this for 12 years, he said. I didn't see it. You were looking at the compound. Wren said. I was looking at the negative space. It's a different habit. Kowalczyk didn't say anything else for a while. Then he said, the second shot, running target dark, what was the range? 310. He nodded slowly, not impressed, exactly. More like a man recalibrating something he had believed was fixed. The after-action was conducted at 0800 the following morning. Stetch ran it himself, which was unusual, and sat at the head of the table with the expression of a man who has been presented with information that complicates an opinion he had formed very quickly and defended with some force. Braddock delivered the team assessment in the flat language of someone reporting facts, which was its own kind of editorial. The secondary building flagged in Wren's analysis contained the 2 individuals who posed the primary ambush risk, Braddock said. Neutralizing them before the main breach reduced the contact phase by what I estimate is 45 seconds and likely prevented additional casualties. The north position, also flagged by Wren in the pre-mission brief, contained 4 individuals in a buried room not identified in any prior intelligence product. Stetch looked at the table. That's 4 fighters sitting in a hole underneath the compound, Braddock continued, with the careful neutrality of a man who had thought about how to phrase this for several hours. We would have walked right past them on the primary approach. The table was quiet. Tulloch, sitting to Stetch's left, was looking at his notes. The updated scheme accounted for the south approach, Braddock said. That's why the north position was on our flank instead of at our back. Stetch cleared his throat, and the air coordination during the extraction wasn't needed, Braddock said, Because the ground position was sound, Wren's pre-mission analysis made the air package a contingency rather than a necessity. That's the outcome you want. Stetch looked at Wren, who was sitting at the far end of the table and had not spoken. You have a background in signals intelligence, Stetch said. It wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite a statement either. It was the sound of a man trying to find a frame that explained what he'd been told without requiring him to revise his initial assessment very substantially. I cross-trained, Wren said. Signals, imagery, some forensic tracking. My first deployment was with an intelligence support element before I went back through the combat controller pipeline. That explains the pattern recognition. Some of it, Wren said. The rest is just looking at things until they make sense. Stetch nodded like this, settled something. It didn't. Everyone at the table knew it didn't, but the meeting moved on, because that is how these things go. The adjustment happens quietly, in the margins, and nobody holds a ceremony for it. Braddock walked her out of the building afterward. He's going to try to claim the south approach was in the original scheme, Braddock said. I know, Wren said. It wasn't. I know that too, sir. Braddock stopped walking. He was a man who had come up in a military culture that sorted people into categories quickly and defended those categories with conviction. And he had done that with Wren, and he was aware of having done it, which was more self-awareness than many people managed. The pattern recognition thing, he said. The way you read the tracks, the thermal on the roof. I've worked with a lot of combat controllers and a lot of intelligence people, and I haven't seen someone put those pieces together that fast before. Wren didn't answer immediately. She was looking at something across the compound. Not a threat, just a pattern in the way the light was hitting the dust, maybe, or the way a vehicle was parked at a slightly wrong angle to the gate. My father was a geologist, she said. He used to take me out to read rock formations when I was a kid. He said, everything leaves a record. You just have to know what kind of record you're looking at. She paused. He said most people walk through the landscape and see the surface. A geologist sees time. He sees every event that happened to a place, laid down in layers. I think I just started doing that with everything else. Braddock stood there for a moment. Then he said, your father's still doing that work? He died 4 years ago, Wren said. Pancreatic cancer. He made it 8 months after the diagnosis. Braddock said nothing. There was nothing to say that didn't feel inadequate. He used to tell me that observation is the most underrated skill in any discipline, Wren said. He said people spend all their time developing techniques and almost no time developing the ability to see what the techniques are supposed to be applied to. She looked back at Braddock. I think he was right. I think he was right about a lot of things. The next mission came in 60 hours. This one was different. A vehicle interdiction, stopping a convoy carrying materials that intelligence assessed as components for a large-scale attack on a Canadian logistics hub 40 kilometers north. The convoy was moving through a mountain road corridor where air support was limited by terrain masking and the window for interdiction was narrow. Stetch briefed it personally, which meant he was invested, which meant he had already formed opinions about how it would go. Wren sat in the back and listened. The plan called for a blocking position at a road junction with ranger elements on the high ground to either side and an air package on standby for the convoy vehicles themselves. It was a reasonable plan, built on the assumption that the convoy would take the most direct route through the corridor, which was what the intelligence product suggested and what 2 previous convoys from the same network had done. When Stetch finished, Wren raised her hand. This was noted afterward by everyone who was present, not because it was unusual to have questions after a briefing, but because of what happened in the following 4 minutes and because of how Stetch responded. The alternate route through the Qasim Valley, Wren said. Have we ruled it out? The Qasim route adds 90 minutes, Stetch said. These convoys run on schedule. They're not going to sacrifice 90 minutes. They sacrificed 4 hours in February when the primary route was under observation, Wren said. That's in the intelligence product. Stetch looked at her with the expression of a man who had been corrected in a public setting and was processing the experience. That was a different network. Same facilitation cell, Wren said. Logistics and route selection are centralized. The people planning this convoy's movement are the same people who made the February call. They know we use pattern analysis. If they suspect we're expecting them on the primary route, we have no indication they suspect anything. We also had no indication they suspect anything. They chose, Wren said, and they chose the alternate route. The room was quiet. Braddock was watching Stetch, Kowalczyk was watching Wren. Finch was looking at the map, and Tulloch was looking at his notes with the expression of a man who has already drafted two versions of an after-action report and is trying to determine which one he'll be submitting. The blocking position requires 40 minutes to establish, Stetch said. We can't cover both routes simultaneously. I'm not suggesting we cover both simultaneously, Wren said. I'm suggesting we delay the blocking element until we have route confirmation. Hold them short of the junction until I can get eyes into the Chasm corridor and confirm or deny. You want to hold the team in a vehicle for an extra 2 hours on the chance that the convoy decides to take the long way. I want to hold the team in a vehicle for an extra 2 hours on the chance that we're about to establish a blocking position on the wrong road. The silence that followed that sentence had a texture to it. Stetch looked at Braddock. Braddock said, I think we should hear her out, sir. What followed was not an agreement. Stetch did not agree. He made clear, in the specific language of a senior officer who has learned to push back without technically violating the chain of command, that he considered the delay unnecessary and the alternate route concern speculative. He noted that Wren had one successful mission on her record, and that one mission was not a methodology. Then he approved a modified plan because Braddock had used the phrase commander's prerogative in a way that left Stetch very little room, and because Tulloch had quietly shown him the February intelligence summary with the alternate route notation highlighted. The modification was this. Wren would move to a forward observation point in the Chasm Valley 2 hours before the blocking element established at the primary junction. If she confirmed convoy movement in the alternate corridor, the blocking element would abort the primary position and redirect. If she confirmed nothing, the primary plan proceeded. It was a compromise that satisfied nobody, which meant it was probably the right call. Wren moved to the Chasm observation point at 4:30 alone, which was also noted afterward. She had a spotter rifle, a radio, and the spotting scope, and she was in position on a narrow rock shelf above the valley floor by 0520, an hour before the convoy was expected on either route. At 0613, she came over the radio. I have vehicle movement in the Chasm Valley, she said. Single vehicle, slow, running dark, no headlights. Braddock was in the lead vehicle of the holding element, 40 minutes from the primary junction. He transmitted to the air package immediately. How far behind the primary traffic window, he said. 16 minutes early, Wren said. They didn't take the direct route, and they moved up their timeline. They're trying to be somewhere else before we expect them to arrive. Braddock redirected the element. Stetch, listening on the command net, said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, confirmed. Wren said, first vehicle confirmed. Wait for convoy spacing. A pause. Second vehicle 400 meters behind. Third vehicle approximately 600 meters behind second. Convoy is 3 vehicles, Stetch said. Intel said 3 to 5, Tulloch said quietly from beside him. The element arrived in the Chasm Valley with 8 minutes to spare. The blocking position established on a section of road that offered no cover to either side. The air package came in on a suppression run on Wren's coordinate call, and the 3 vehicles stopped in a kill zone that they had driven into because they had been confident they were on a route nobody was expecting them to use. The interdiction was over in 12 minutes. Wren came off her position and linked up with the blocking element at the consolidated point. She was carrying her gear and had dust in her hair and on her jacket from the rock shelf. And she looked, Kowalczyk would say later, like someone who had been waiting patiently for something she was fairly certain was coming. He walked up to her while Braddock was coordinating with the air package on post-strike assessment. The timeline change, Kowalczyk said. Running dark 16 minutes early. How did you know that was significant? I didn't know, Wren said. I suspected. A vehicle running dark in a mountain valley at a 600 is not behaving normally. Normal vehicles use headlights. Vehicles that are running dark are trying not to be seen. If they were trying not to be seen, they knew something was happening. That means they had information, and if they had information, they changed their approach. You had that figured out from one vehicle, Kowalczyk said. From one vehicle running dark, Wren said. The dark part was the tell. Kowalczyk stood there. 12 years, he said, more to himself than to her. You were looking for the convoy, Wren said. I was looking for anything that didn't fit. Same valley, different question. The full debrief happened 3 hours later. Stetch ran it, again with the expression of a man who had been wrong twice in 48 hours and was handling this with more grace than Tulloch had expected. He gave Wren credit for the route assessment in language that was precise enough to mean something and general enough to preserve his own narrative. Braddock let it stand without comment. Afterward, in the corridor, Stetch stopped beside her. What he said surprised Tulloch, who was close enough to hear it. "I made assumptions about this assignment," Stetch said. "I'm telling you that directly because I think you deserve to hear it directly." Wren looked at him. "I was wrong about your capabilities," Stetch said. "I wasn't wrong about the pressure this team operates under, or the margin for error we can't afford. But I drew a conclusion I shouldn't have drawn before I had evidence." A pause. "I won't do that again," Wren said. "I appreciate that, sir." Stetch nodded and walked away. It wasn't a transformation. It wasn't an apology that cost him nothing. It was a man doing a thing that was harder for him than it looked, and that was enough. Braddock found her later in the equipment bay, running a function check on her rifle, with the systematic patience of someone who has done it 1,000 times and does not intend to do it any less carefully on the 1,001st. "You're good at this job," he said. "I know," Wren said. It wasn't arrogance. It was the same quality the statement would have had if someone had asked a geologist whether he could read a rock face. "Yes, that's what I do. That's what I've been doing." "Your father would have been proud," Braddock said. Wren set the rifle down and was quiet for a moment. The equipment bay smelled of oil and aluminium and the particular dust of the country they were operating in, and outside, the late afternoon was settling toward dark. "I think he would have asked me if I'd had time to look at the geology of the Kasim Valley," she said. "He would have wanted to know if it was igneous or sedimentary. He would have asked me about the fault lines and whether the road was stable." She smiled slightly, and it was the expression of someone a thing they miss, someone recalling a thing they miss very much. "He was always more interested in the landscape doing in it. Sounds like a good man." He was. She picked up the rifle again and continued the function check. "Sir," she said, after a moment without looking up, "I want to flag something for the next mission." "What is it?" "The facilitation cell that ran this convoy is the same cell that's been coordinating movement for 4 other networks in this corridor. If we disrupted their route selection confidence tonight, they're going to change how they plan the next movement. That's good in the short term. In the medium term, it means their next operation is going to look different from everything we've seen from them before, and our pattern analysis is going to be working from a baseline that no longer applies." Braddock stood there. "You're telling me that succeeding tonight makes the next one harder," he said. "I'm telling you the people we're dealing with adapt," Wren said. "And I'd rather we know that going in than figure it out when we're already in the valley." Braddock nodded slowly. He was thinking about the next briefing and about Stetch, and about the ongoing argument between caution and momentum that ran through every operation he'd ever been part of. "Brief it in the morning," he said. "I'll make sure the colonel is there." "Yes, sir." He left her to the rifle. Outside, the FOB was settling into its evening routines. The shift changes and meal rotations, and the particular restlessness of people who are trained for intensity and spend much of their time waiting for it. Somewhere in the operations center, Tulloch was writing a report that would make its way up a chain of command and eventually contribute, in some small and untrackable way, to a record that said a staff sergeant named Wren had been right about things that mattered. She finished the function check, packed the rifle, and went to find the updated imagery for the next corridor. Finch would tell people later. Years later, when he was a senior NCO himself and was trying to explain to younger soldiers what it meant to be genuinely good at something. Not the kind of person who needed to be told she'd done well. She already knew what she'd done. She was already thinking about what came next.